Arch was gone, vanished. It had been 3 days since his last message, 3 days of gnawing silence, 3 days of my life dissolving into a frantic blur of unanswered calls and dead-end searches. His apartment, empty. His phone, disconnected. His life, a ghost of its former self. My chest ached with a chilling premonition, a knot of fear tightening with every passing hour. Arch wouldn't just disappear. Not like this, not without a word. Something was terribly wrong. I could feel it in my bones, a creeping dread that clung to me like a shroud. My mind raced, desperate for answers. Where could he be? Who would want to hurt him? The questions echoed in the cavernous silence of my apartment, each one a hammer blow to my already fractured sanity. I needed help. I needed someone to tell me this was just a bad dream, a cruel joke that I would wake up from soon. But deep down, I knew better. This was real, and it was terrifying. "There's something you need to see," Daya's voice, sharp and urgent, cut through my despair. Her face, usually lit by the warm glow of her laptop, was pale and drawn. The lines around her eyes seemed deeper, etched by the same fear that gnawed at my insides. Daya, my tech-savvy best friend, had been tirelessly scouring Arch's digital footprint. Social media, emails, online forums, she was a digital ghost whisperer, coaxing secrets from the ethereal realm of the internet. And she had found something that made my blood run cold. Arch had been researching a group, a very secretive and dangerous organization. Daya continued, her voice barely a whisper. They operate in the shadows, pulling strings, silencing anyone who gets too close. Her words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. Enemies. Arch had enemies, powerful ones, the kind who could make someone disappear without a trace, the kind who could silence anyone who dared to ask questions. Fear, raw and primal, surged through me, threatening to consume me whole. The package arrived at dawn, a plain brown box sitting ominously on my doorstep. It was an unusual sight, one that immediately set my nerves on edge. No return address, no sender's name, just a chilling emptiness that screamed of malice. The box seemed to radiate a sinister energy as if it were a harbinger of doom. My hand trembled as I reached for it, a wave of nausea washing over me. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to leave it alone. This had to be a mistake, this couldn't be happening. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Inside the box, nestled in a bed of crimson satin, was a sight that would forever sear itself into my memory. 2 hands severed at the wrist lay pale and lifeless. The blood had long since dried, leaving behind a rusty stain on the fabric. My breath caught in my throat, a scream trapped in the back of my mind. "Arch," I choked out, the name a strangled whisper. I recognized the worn leather band on one of the fingers, a bracelet I had gifted him on our first anniversary. The world tilted on its axis, the room spinning as darkness threatened to engulf me. Daya's hand on my shoulder, firm and grounding, was the only thing that kept me from collapsing completely. "We need to call the police," she said, her voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to the chaos raging within me. I nodded, unable to speak, my mind still reeling from the shock. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The police would come, questions would be asked, and the investigation would begin. But in that moment, all I could think about was the horror of what lay before me. My breath caught in my throat, a scream trapped in the back of my mind. "Arch," I choked out, the name a strangled whisper, the name a strangled whisper. I recognized the worn leather band on one of the fingers, a bracelet I had gifted him on our first anniversary. The world tilted on its axis, the room spinning as darkness threatened to engulf me. Daya's hand on my shoulder, firm and grounding, was the only thing that kept me from collapsing completely. "We need to call the police," she said, her voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to the chaos raging within me. I nodded, unable to speak, my mind still reeling from the shock. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The police would come, questions would be asked, and the investigation would begin. But in that moment, all I could think about was the horror of what lay before me. Daya's hand on my shoulder, firm and grounding, was the only thing that kept me from collapsing completely. "We need to call the police," she said, her voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to the chaos raging within me. I nodded, unable to speak, my mind still reeling from the shock. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The police would come, questions would be asked, and the investigation would begin. But in that moment, all I could think about was the horror of what lay before me. The police. The very thought of them sent a shiver down my spine. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through me. Could I trust them? Or were they just another part of this nightmare? Or were they somehow connected to the people who had taken Arch? The lines between friend and foe blurred in my mind. The doubts swirled in my mind, fueled by fear and paranoia. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every sound a potential danger. My life had become a twisted, terrifying thriller, and I was trapped in the lead role. There was no escape, no respite from the constant dread. Daya studied me, her brow furrowed with concern. She could see the fear etched into every line of my face. "You can't do this alone," she said, her voice gentle but firm. Her words were a lifeline, a small beacon of hope in the darkness. "The police are our best shot at finding Arch and bringing those responsible to justice." But could I really believe that? But justice seemed like a distant, impossible dream, a mirage that faded the closer I got to it. All I could see was Arch's face, his warm smile replaced by the chilling image of his lifeless hands. The memory haunted me, a constant reminder of what was at stake. The fear was a living, breathing entity, coiling around my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. It was relentless, unyielding. I was drowning in it, pulled under by a current of terror I couldn't escape. Every moment felt like a battle for survival. What if they're watching me? The paranoia was suffocating, making it hard to think clearly. I whispered, my voice trembling with unshed tears. The fear was overwhelming, a constant presence that I couldn't shake. What if they come after me next? The question echoed in my mind, a terrifying possibility that I couldn't ignore. The questions hung in the air, heavy with the weight of my fear, each one a reminder of the danger that lurked in every corner. Daya's silence spoke volumes. Her eyes, filled with a mix of fear and determination, told a story that words could not capture. She couldn't promise my safety, none of us could. The uncertainty hung in the air, thick and suffocating, as we debated our next move. The enemy was a phantom lurking in the shadows, their motives as murky as the depths of their cruelty. Every corner seemed to hide a new threat, every shadow a potential danger. Trusting the police felt like a gamble, a desperate roll of the dice with my life hanging in the balance. It was a risk I wasn't sure I could afford to take, but what choice did I have? The crossroads I stood at offered no clear path, only a series of difficult decisions. I couldn't fight this alone. The weight of the situation was too much for one person to bear. I needed help, even if it meant risking everything. The precipice I stood on was daunting, but the hand reaching out was my only lifeline. "You're right," I said, my voice hoarse and thin. The words felt heavy, laden with the weight of our predicament. "We need to call them." The decision was made, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. The words tasted like ash in my mouth, a bitter acknowledgement of the terrifying reality I found myself in. Each syllable was a reminder of the danger we faced. The arrival of the police brought with it a strange mix of relief and trepidation. The flashing lights cut through the darkness, a stark contrast to the fear that enveloped us. Their presence felt intrusive, a violation of the sanctuary of my grief. Yet, it was a necessary intrusion, one that brought a semblance of order to the chaos, but at the same time, they represented a glimmer of hope, a beacon of authority in the encroaching darkness. Their resolve was a small comfort in an otherwise bleak situation. I clung to that hope, however fragile, as I recounted the events of the past few days. Each word a painful reminder of what I had lost. The sorrow in my voice was matched only by the determination to see this through. The police promised protection, but their reassurances rang hollow in the face of such calculated brutality. Fear became my constant companion, a shadow that followed me everywhere. I started seeing threats in every corner, hearing whispers in the wind. My once familiar apartment transformed into a gilded cage, a constant reminder of my vulnerability. Daya insisted on staying with me, a comforting presence in the suffocating darkness. We turned my apartment into a fortress, installing security cameras, reinforcing locks, and sleeping with pepper spray clutched in our hands. Paranoia seeped into every aspect of our lives, turning us into prisoners of our own fear. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside the window sent my heart racing. Sleep offered no escape, my nights haunted by nightmares of Arch and the chilling image of his severed hands. I was living a waking nightmare, and the line between reality and terror blurred with each passing day. The stalker was always one step ahead, A chilling game of cat and mouse had begun, the hunter toying with its prey. First, it was a single black rose left on my doorstep. Its velvety petals stained a sinister shade of red. Then a cryptic note slipped under my door, the words, "Silence is golden," scrawled in jagged handwriting. Fear morphed into a steely resolve. These weren't just random acts of intimidation, they were messages, carefully orchestrated to instill fear and silence me. But they had underestimated me. Every threat, every chilling reminder of their presence only fueled my determination to uncover the truth. I wouldn't be silenced, I wouldn't cower in fear. Arch deserved justice, and I wouldn't rest until I found out what happened to him. The police might have been struggling to connect the dots, but I knew, deep down, that the answers were out there, hidden in the shadows, waiting to be unearthed. The closer I got to the truth, the more dangerous my quest became. The people responsible for Arch's disappearance were powerful and ruthless, willing to do whatever it took to protect their secrets. And I had become a liability, a loose end that needed to be tied up. The threats escalated, each one bolder, more brazen than the last. My car was vandalized, the words "Stop Digging" spray-painted across the windshield in menacing red letters. My phone buzzed incessantly with anonymous calls, the silence on the other end more terrifying than any voice. Fear was a constant companion, but it no longer controlled me. I had stared into the abyss, and the abyss had stared back. But somewhere in that darkness, I had found a strength I never knew I possessed, a fierce determination to avenge Arch, to expose the darkness that had swallowed him whole. The journey ahead would be fraught with danger, a perilous descent into the heart of a conspiracy that stretched far beyond anything I could have imagined. But I was no longer the same scared woman who had received that chilling package on her doorstep. I had been forged in the fires of grief and fear, my spirit tempered into steel. The people who took Arch had awakened a sleeping dragon. They had underestimated my love for him, my unwavering loyalty to his memory. They thought they could silence me with threats and intimidation. They were wrong. I would find them, I would expose them, and I would ensure that justice, however long it took, would be served. This was my promise to Arch, a vow whispered into the darkness, a testament to the enduring power of love and the unwavering pursuit of truth.